Welcome back to Two Maintainers and a Cop, an Air Force Fortify the Force production. In this episode, we connect with retired Lieutenant Colonel Dan Schilling, a former Air Force combat controller and a veteran of the Battle of Mogadishu in 1993. Dan is also the author of Alone at Dawn, an account of the sacrifice of Master Sgt John Chapman atop Taku Ghar in Afghanistan in 2002. Schilling's 30 years in the military, spent primarily in the special operations community, have taken him around the world and on numerous combat and clandestine deployments. Since retiring and returning home, Dan has honed his skills in another area, that of mental wellness and resilience. Join us today as we welcome author, adventurer, and warrior Dan Schilling and reflect on the fortitude life requires of us all, especially when we find ourselves fighting alone at dawn.
All right. Good morning, Department of the Air Force family. Welcome back to Two Maintainers and a Cop. I'm Cody Trawick, and I'm joined here by Garrett Griffith. So we're two maintainers today. We're not joined by our cop today, Justin. He's out in Jupiter, Florida, pursuing his dream of becoming a level 1 certified dolphin trainer. And, it's a dream of his that he's had since being a young man growing up in West Virginia. And we don't want to get in the way of him pursuing his dreams. So that's what he's doing. So it's just me and Griff this morning. And this morning we're joined by author and retired Lieutenant Colonel Dan Schilling. Very happy to have him here. He's a combat controller, he's an adventurer, and he's an author. And we're going to get into some talks about resilience and fortitude and some of his experiences on the ground, operationally, in life. And it's going to be pretty good. So, Dan, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here, sir. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, Cody, Griff, I really appreciate you guys having me on. I think what you are doing or endeavoring to do, I know you guys are in the early stages, is critical to individuals and the force. And man, if I can contribute in any way, I'm happy to be here, because resilience and mental health and happiness, which is a word people don't talk about very much, those are really important topics for me. And happy to be here and chat about it, and looking forward to it.
All right, awesome. Well, we appreciate it again. And resilience, I think, was that something they even talked about when you were active duty? Was that even a thing?
Well, I retired in 2016, so I did almost 31 years. So yes is the answer. I think you'll see some of these initiatives. They're a friend of mine who's a one-star, General Claude Tudor, and before him, Mike Martin. There's an Air Force office, I forget the name because I've been out since 16, that was already focusing on this. And I think they recognized the need for resilience and defense against suicide, which is a big indicator. You can tell there's a problem when people are killing themselves. But to answer your question, Cody, no, when I first came in and throughout the first 2/3 of my career, it really wasn't there. Mental health professionals, with what we had access to, were mostly there to assess you to see how well you could do, at least in the special ops community. And even then, as an operator, enlisted combat controller, and then later as a special tactics officer and squadron commander, because of how I grew up under that environment of don't talk to the mental health people, because you're going to be pulled off flight status, or some other terrible thing will happen to your career. That was the sense amongst all of us. And when I say all of us, I really say the Air Force, and primarily the enlisted force, which is most of the force. So I think it's come a long way, but we didn't talk about it at all. Not then. You really just relied on your teammates, to the left or right, the man and woman you worked with.
And you did not come in as a combat controller or even Air Force. You came in as an infantryman in the Army. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I'm not that smart. So I joined the Army. And, in fact, I'm so stupid, I joined the Army twice. How many people do that in their life? So I started off as an infantry grunt paratrooper. And I enjoyed that. I got to jump out of airplanes. So that had never occurred to me. And hump a ruck and a 60 around, and I found those things really appealing. But mostly for me, and I think this is like a lot of people, when I got into the military, I realized it didn't matter where I came from. It doesn't matter your background. It's a meritocracy in so many ways. And the more I worked and the harder I worked and the longer I worked, the more things and opportunities opened up for me. And that I landed in a good place. And then I went TDY with a couple combat controllers, and man, the rest is history. I realized I need to go there. That's where I belonged.
So in terms of the time frame, roundabout when was that?
I came in 85, and then I got into combat control in 87. I switched from the Army to the Air Force through some fancy footwork and sleight of hand. I got out of my Army contract and into the Air Force. And I was actually in the first ever integrated combat control pararescue pipeline. Before that, they'd always been separate. And in 1987, our indoctrination course, which was sort of our version of BUDS, only with smarter guys, was put together. And I ended up with a whole bunch of PJs and combat controllers, guys that I have maintained friendships with now since 35 years. And then I ended up in combat control that way.
Bit of a bonding experience going through that indoc process.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we all talk about it. The guys from the 15 survivors from my indoc course out of 150 plus guys, 15 of us graduated indoc. And when I graduated and became a combat controller a year and a half later, there were 6 guys from my original course. That's like a 4% success rate or something. But those guys that I graduated with, we still talk today. All of us are retired now because we're old as dirt. And we're going to probably get together this summer, go down to San Antonio, check on the state of affairs, talk about how much harder it was in our day, that usual stuff. And those bonds are just like the bonds of combat. When you go through something like that is life transformative, it's a source of resilience, and it's a source of great satisfaction at the same time.
So when you guys get together, are you guys gonna do like a smoke session?
Yeah, it lasts about 7 minutes now. Used to last about 4 or 5 hours. Now it's like, who can do 50 push-ups? Maybe guy number 3, whatever, that kind of stuff. But you know what it is? It's really, this is the benefit. And if you're in the military, if you're in the Air Force right now, and you're in your first enlistment or your 4th enlistment, and you go through those phases of, man, is this really worth it? And what's the real benefit to being in the military? I'm told what to do. I don't have the same rights as a citizen. I can't refuse an order. I can't just quit my job. But, part of what I realized through the lens of retrospect and the types of things that I write now as an author is that there is so much benefit and just, man, pride you can take out of being part of a community that's sole purpose is not about you at all. There's so much value in that as an individual. And I'm glad I'm doing what I do now. I don't miss being in the military, but that's why 35 years later, those guys, I'm still dialed in with those guys.
Correct. And for those of y'all who don't know what a smoke session is, it's basically a remedial employment of tactics, usually involving a lot of push-ups, burpees, flutter kicks, sometimes water, different surfaces, bodies of water. And it's pretty endemic to the special ops communities. I came in as seer. And so I spent some time as Medina Annex over there at Lackland in 08. And it's just like you said, Dan, it hasn't changed. I was friends with a lot of combat controllers at that time. I was friends with a lot of PJs as well. And we've stayed in touch because we just share all those old stories of coming together. And it's really interesting to me how the things that sucked the worst at the time are the things we all celebrate, 10 to 15 years later.
But to continue that theme, that's my experience with combat. combat as I experience it, which is different than a lot of other people in the military. So my community is, is grounded in that visceral, personal face-to-face type of engagement. And what you just mentioned, Cody, is part of what you take with you. The things that were the hardest or the worst to experience are the most indelible. And it's got upside and it's got downside. And how that affects you contributes to your resilience or diminishes it, depending on how you deal with it and then view that lens and through the the lens you choose to see it. And that's what fortifying yourself is all about. How to maximize your ability to learn from and embrace the terrible things that have happened or the hard things that have happened, even if you're proud of them or glad they happened, versus being destroyed by them.
That's very powerful, because obviously people who have been in combat, they've had a human experience that I would probably say less than 1% of humans in modern times get an opportunity to experience, for lack of a better word.
Well, maybe. I mean, if you don't mind the injection,
Not at all, not at all.
In many parts of the world, this is what I think one of the reasons my perspective on life and resilience and purpose and happiness is different than many people is by virtue of the other place, not just my experiences, but the places that I've had the opportunity to go. And so when you're in sub-Saharan Africa or places in Central America, even places in Mexico, even where, man, life can be cheap. So what you just talked about, hey, that one fraction of a percent of the US population, for instance, I think that's a good the corollary. But other people are struggling for safety and subsistence every day around the world. You can talk about Ukraine all you want, but stuff that's been happening in Rwanda way in the 90s, where hundreds of thousands of people were getting killed by hand. So a lot of people experience this around the world. We're very fortunate, the three of us and everyone listening to this podcast, that we're Americans in the US military. Our standard of living, our appreciation of things, and what we have to deal with is not like what other people around the world deal with every single day. Survival is a daily consideration for those people. For the three of us, it's how you make coffee.
Yeah, and that's on a bad day. Yeah, my I've got to plug my phone into the charger. It's only at 35%. Well, I think that's a pretty decent segue into your time in Somalia, sir. Now, at what point were you at in your career when Operation Restore Hope kind of kicked off, and when did you arrive on the ground in Somalia as part of that operation?
So by this time in my career, I finally, my IQ went up by 30 points and I left the Army and joined the Air Force. And so, now I'm a combat controller. I did a few years at Hurlburt in the 23rd Special Tactics Squadron. Then it was the 1723rd Combat Control Squadron. And I selected and went up to the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, which is really the Air Force's premier ground special operations unit. It does things that other units don't do. So in 93, when this all happened, I was actually, I wouldn't have been able to say this before, but there's many books and movies. I was working with Delta Force at the time. I was assigned over there. And, things started to unfold. Operation Restore Hope, which was starvation in Somalia. And this is America at its best, because we didn't go to Somalia in 92 and then into 93 when I eventually went. But this background is important, so bear with me. America had no interest in Somalia. There was no oil there. There's no strategic alignment. It wasn't geography that we needed to have in case of a World War III. It was America reaching out to try and stave off starvation. And that's what America does more than any other country in the world. It's very important for people to understand that. However, in the course of this, the militias that are vying for control of the city of Mogadishu, which is about 1.2 million in population, they start using food as a weapon. Why? Because you control the food, you can control people. So we went over there in '93, myself, a handful of guys from the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, most notably Tim Wilkinson, Air Force Cross. He was our first Air Force Cross since Vietnam at that time. We went over there to hunt down one of the warlords, and his name doesn't even matter anymore, to try and stabilize the situation. So that's why I went to Somalia. We had brought a Ranger Company minus with us for security, which was that's more history. You can read about that in Black Hawk Down or my book, The Battle of Mogadishu. And I was there as a combat controller. And so I'm on the ground running convoys. I was doing foot patrols. And then, of course, everybody knows that one gunfight, which became Black Hawk Down. Man, it's one of the most violent gunfights this country's had, even still to this day, in probably 50, 60 years. And it was a remarkable, back to fortitude, demonstration of the fortitude of committed individuals to each other to still accomplish a mission despite the odds. 200 guys in a city of 1 million people. I mean, we're fighting off thousands of people. Not only did we succeed, we did something that I challenge any other country in the world to even attempt, and have one man walk out alive. And we accomplished the mission. People think it was a failure, but it wasn't. Operationally, we went out to get these guys, and we did. It cost us 18 of our comrades, but we did it.
Yeah, I think that how we define success in the West is a little bit different. The metrics we use, I think if we lose one person or two, that tends to get really magnified. But in the context of conflict on a grand scale, and certainly the situation on the ground in Mogadishu, it truly is remarkable. I've read a lot about the battle myself. But yeah, to provide a backdrop for that, it started out as a peacekeeping operation, as you said, and we're trying to make sure that food and aid are able to get to the Somali populace, and there's a lot of warring factions of clans, and there was one kind of prevalent amongst the rest. And so that was at the juncture when you and Delta Force were called in, from what I'm taking from what you were saying, to kill or capture this warlord leader. But in reality, there was tons of different factions in that city. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was really 4 major groups, and everything there is driven along clan lines. Mm-hmm. And that's, culturally, that's how they organize, and that's how they associate. In this country, we really associate with other Americans. You may have some sub thing. You could be an immigrant from another country. You could be a different ethnicity, different orientations, all these things that comprise, but we tend to come around together. In a place like Somalia, it's clan lines. But it goes back to what you were talking about, what you mentioned, how we view things differently in the West. What is great about us as Americans and Air Force members is that the value we place on human life is quite different, which is why what you were talking about, one man or woman gets killed, that's a big thing for us. And we're trying to, we don't leave people behind. That's a very important thing. Over there, it's not that way. It's just not that way. It's not better. It's not worse. It's different. And you have to understand that if you're in a discipline like joining the military, you have to understand the realities of other people's perspectives on life and death. Because what we're engaged in when things go south is combat. We may talk about performance or efficiency in the maintenance shop or everything else, but you know what that jet is designed to do when you launch it downrange? Kill people. That's right. So fly, fight, and win as a motto is great. But when you're talking about flying and fighting, that fighting is killing. Those are synonyms in this case. And so how you value those things. And to bring it back home to, fortifying ourselves and being resilient, it's important to understand that. And it's important to spend time thinking about it. And I would argue, because I'm a guy who likes books. I like books. I like writing them. I like reading them. If you read a lot, spend time on that. You need to think about this topic, because if you think about it in advance, you're going to come out better when you go through the crucible of what you do for a living when you have to do the hard stuff.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well, you did some hard stuff that day, and just I'll keep it short. If people want the details of that battle, they can certainly read Black Hawk Down, and you have your own account of that battle as well. There's a lot of literature out there about it, and I've been fascinated by it since I was 15 years old. So, but you were in the lead convoy going to the target building, and this was not to capture that warlord. It was some high-ranking associates of his.
Yep.
And that was successful. Took down the target really quickly, but very quickly, y'all also found yourself under a considerable amount of fire. So your convoy is RTB, return to base. You're on the way back. In the meantime, I think within about 20 minutes of one another, two helicopters were shot down, Super 6-1 and Super 6-4. You guys returned to base and basically make the decision at that time to go back out and return to the first crash site.
Well, it wasn't a decision so much as an inevitability. We were going back out. Right? There was no decision to be made. The decisions to be made were how to do it. Because we knew we were in for a lot of trouble. I mean, thousands and thousands of people are converging on this thing, and our force is now. We had about 50% casualties on the first go round when we went out to capture those guys, and they actually shot down 4 helicopters. 2 of them actually made it back to base, crashed on base. 2 of them did not, obviously, which is why the title of the book and movie are what they are. So yeah, it was a singular day. All of us that were there have been indelibly stamped by that 18-hour long gunfight. And but that's to talk about courage, which I saw so much of in other people on that day. To me, I talked about this in my most recent book. But courage is there's a secret to courage. People think that heroes are on some sort of pantheon, that they've tapped into this thing, or they have this innate ability that whatever else in the world we don't have. And that's not true. Courage and heroism are simply doing what you had to do when it had to be done, despite being scared. Don't kid yourself. Everybody out there in those gunfights, we may be focusing on what we're doing and doing some act to save somebody else's life. Guys are still scared.
So were you scared? What were your emotions at the time? Or were you fired up? Like was there even time to think about it?
There's a lot of time to think about it. Gunfights have a rhythm. Just like your daily life has a rhythm. You go through highs and lows. You're awake, you wake up, you're up here, and then you get tired in the afternoon. And there's sort of you have a circadian rhythm. It goes every 24 hours. Gunfights are the same way. They have peaks and they have lulls. So when things are slowed down, you got time to think about stuff, whether it's 10 seconds or 10 minutes. Things enter your mind. You're still thinking about what you got to do, but let's face it, people are dying to the left and right of you. Your brain is also trying to process some of these things. The range of emotions, to answer your question, it goes from, for me, I knew I was going to die. I had actually just resigned myself. I was watching other guys die. Everybody else in my vehicle got shot, except for one other guy. It was like 5 people, or 6 people. And I was just waiting for my turn to get shot. And I'm like, I'm going to die here in the next hour or two. 2, I am so angry. I'm going to kill every son of a bitch out there that is a legitimate target. That's one thing about American forces, man. We have fire discipline. We don't just kill people indiscriminately like a lot of military forces do, say Russian forces that are invading the country like Ukraine. And so your emotions just run the spectrum. If it's an hour-long gunfight, that's different. If it's 18 hours, you got time to think about that stuff.
What goes through your head? What's the mindset after you've resigned yourself to the fact that you're going to die? How do you feel about things? How do you perceive the world and things happening around you?
I think you stop feeling, and all it is you're just focused on what you have to do. Man, there's guys bleeding in my truck. I want those guys to get back. I mean, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like I resigned myself to giving up. I just didn't think I was going to survive. Those are two very different things.
Right.
You know, I became a Buddhist later in life. Buddhists are very peaceful people. I do not believe in violence, but being a Buddhist is completely compatible with defending yourself or defending others in the face of a rapist or a murderer or a hostile force on the battlefield. You don't want to do it. I don't want to kill people. I'm sorry that I had to kill people in my life. I don't intend to kill any other people. If you threaten my family and there's no way out, I'm going to kill you.
Right.
So go back to what we're talking about here. Those things, you know, I just had to keep going. You know, I had so many things I needed to pay attention to, and I'm trying to piece together. As a combat controller, you have a lot of responsibility for an enlisted individual, man or woman. You're usually one of the lowest ranking people, because let's face it, all of us listening to this podcast are in the Air Force, and the Air Force promotes very slowly compared to the other services.
Oh yeah.
If I'm out there with these E7s, E8s, and E9s, I'm an E5. E5 Dano has all these responsibilities. Man, I can't let those go just because I think I'm going to die. And that's what the training is about. To go back to what you learn, how to be resilient and have tenacity through the course of those smoke sessions, and going through that crucible of you can never give up, because they make it easy to give up. All you have to do is say I quit. Raise your hand, the pain will stop.
And they're really nice to you after that, right?
Yeah, and they're even nice to you when they're doing it sometimes. Oh, just quit. I will buy you a beer, Airman Schilling, if you just quit. So some people will go for that. You know, it depends on what you want. And so anyway, that was Somalia. Somalia, I'm very proud to be a veteran of that operation, because it was America at its best. And at the time, it was the greatest joint special operations force ever purpose-built to go execute a hard mission. Now, we've grown a lot in that 20-year war that we just finished last year. But in 1992, 1993, it's a very small community. And we learned so many things came out of that singular gunfight. Most people don't realize the multi-cam uniform came out of that gunfight, out of one gunfight. The blood clotting bandage that is proliferated on the battlefield was born of that gunfight. The type of ballistic helmets that we've used, the Mitch or the Cry Precision, whatever those helmets you kind of have that grew out of that over 30 years, came from that gunfight.
I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's a lot of history that is hidden or is in between in the seams of that mission. And so I'm fortunate that I was there. I'm fortunate I was alive. I should be dead, you know, so I don't complain too much.
Yeah, well, that's well, obviously we're glad you're still here with us, Dan. I mean, that's an incredible perspective to get from somebody who you know, for the rest of us who have never been in that kind of situation. So we appreciate you sharing it with us. Yeah, and to recap, you know, obviously Operation Restore Hope, and that singular day, as you said, it was a much broader scope than just that one day, but that's what's portrayed in the film and what everybody remembers. But yeah, 18 service members killed, 4 helicopters shot down, two of them major battles resulted around, and obviously Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant was in Somali captivity for several days after that. That's a whole nother topic.
10 days.
Right? Yeah, 10 days. We can probably explore that down the line. That's an example of resilience as well. But yeah, just talking about how the world views things. Obviously, the unfortunate politics of the time, and you can make the argument politics are the same today. The way it got framed was a failure, but when you really pay attention to the story and you read about it, there were so many examples of valor. Everybody on the ground. It's really incredible to me, and you know, I'd encourage anybody who's interested to check it out. Now, I think that you know, of course, post 9/11. This is the Griff's kind of got to get into this, talking about Alone at Dawn. There was a lot more support for service members at that time because it was immediately after 9/11, and we all just wanted to go and kick somebody's ass. basically it was a very unifying time. Can you speak to that versus kind of draw a contrast between that and 1993 in Mogadishu?
Yeah, in fact, I think you can do a timeline. You go back in time to Vietnam. You can go to Vietnam, Gulf War, and then Somalia if you like, as a small example of how we viewed things, and then post 9/11, which was, in Vietnam, we still had conscription and guys go to war. And so when these men and women come back, people are spitting on them. Not a lot of resilience help there. And, and fear the VA. Those veterans, those men and women have a different view of the VA than guys and men and women from our era and my era. And you go, on the heels of the first Gulf War, there was a lot of American patriotism still. And that sort of coalesced into how to take care of these troops and what to do with them. And these troops should be valued, not spit upon them. To 9/11, and now we're deploying people, but it's funny because it's a very small community that's really facing this. It's infantry, whether Marine or Army, and special ops, all services that are doing the fighting and real dying on the battlefield. Our Air Force that's providing close air support and air refueling, it's pretty clinical. There's no contesting of airspace over Afghanistan. You can do what you want. You might get shot down by an RPG like Extortion 17, where 3 guys that worked with me at the time and a lot of SEALs died. That's August of 2011. That might be a problem. But really, the people that are facing the combat was this small group of people. And America rallied around them. And to a large extent, they still do. And it's now, in fact, we appreciated and respected so much now that you see it permeating popular culture. Young men in particular wear a lot of flags on their shoulders and Velcro baseball hats. They don't even know why their flag has a Velcro on it. Goes back to the days in the 80s when we would sterilize our uniforms by taking off all our stuff, including the flag. So you had Velcro. They don't even realize that's why they wear a hat with Velcro on it underneath that flag.
Oh.
But they want to look like special operators. They grow beards and all of this stuff. And that's a good thing in a lot of ways because we're appreciating those troops. So back to your question, what that really manifests itself by way of value to those of us who have experienced this. And hey, you don't have to have been in a gunfight to be traumatized by the things you've done in the military. You can be launching jets and they're bombing people, and that could psychologically and philosophically affect you. And it's just as legitimate, I'm saying, as a guy who's experienced extreme combat, for you to feel that way if you're listening to this and man, you're trying to reconcile what you do for a living. Those things all affect you. And it all goes back, I know this is long, but circuitously would come back to your question. What you see after 9/11 is based on all the combat men and women are experiencing. The VA and psychology and even battlefield medicine are advancing very rapidly, and they're coming to understand things that can go back to psychology, to Jung or Freud if you're a Freudian or whomever, and the types of battlefield triage that we do. All those things have advanced so much with the war. What's sad is what hasn't changed. So we can make people more resilient in many ways. But what's sad for me is the people that still kill themselves because for some reason there's individuals that still fall through the cracks. This is still a very hard thing to do, to help someone who's struggling invisibly because you can't see it. It's not printed on their forehead.
Correct. And yeah, and usually the people that need the most help are the ones that are most withholding of that.
For many reasons. They don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to lose their, I'm a badass type A masculine, action guy. And if I tell people I'm struggling, I'm not an action guy anymore, which is bullshit, by the way. But, that's how you feel. And, or I'm going to lose my job. And this is like, as a senior NCO or an officer, if I go seek help, I can't be a squadron commander or squadron chief
Correct.
because
Top secret
I'm
security
damaged.
clearance.
Right. Don't tell anybody. And I think I've gained a certain amount of wisdom, mostly through two things: the experiences I've had around the world, and the time I spend in reflection on these subjects, and reading. I read a lot about these types of things, and a couple of these shelves are really just philosophy books. And philosophy ain't rocket science. You don't have to be afraid of Aristotle to understand that all he's talking about is the purpose of human existence is happiness. That's an easy concept to wrap your head around. It's not rocket science, man. You don't have to be the smartest cat in the room. And so I spent a lot of time on that. And I think that's important for if you're listening to this and you're trying to find your way through, or you just want to be more resilient or a better leader and how to help people who are struggling. You got to read, and then you have to spend time thinking about it. Don't watch TV tonight.
Correct.
Just sit down and think about what it means to you to be resilient.
Well, Griff did some reading last week. He read Alone at Dawn at my insistence. And of course he picked it up on his own too, because after our initial conversation a couple of weeks ago, he wanted to see what it was all about. So I'm gonna let him speak on that.
Right on. So I just finished Alone at Dawn, actually this week, and after doing some research about yourself and reading the book, it's quite obvious that the intention of this book is to bring to light combat controllers and how they operate in the Air Force. And I know everyone's familiar with Navy SEALs and Green Berets and Rangers, and it's not always the case for the combat controllers in the Air Force. And I think this book does an amazing job at portraying that. And more specifically, now Master Sergeant John Chapman and his experience throughout that book through Operation Anaconda. And at first, I wanted to ask you what drew you to this project, or what ties you had to Master Sergeant John Chapman.
So John was a FNG at the 2-4. He's a brand new guy, you know.
Right.
And
Y'all can Google that.
Yeah, right. And so we'll leave the acronym to stand on its own. He was brand new to the 2-4. I was on my way out. I was going off to be an instructor at the Combat Control School. This is 1995, around there. 94, maybe, I don't know, 95. And so I knew him, didn't know him well because he was going through our operator training course, which is what you spend basically a year getting up to speed before you can actually start deploying with units like Delta Force, because these are the world's best. You have to be the world's best. And our guys are. And John Chapman was one of the world's best at being what he should be, which is a combat controller. He's not there to be a Delta operator. My opinion, shooters come and go. It's not hard. It's not as hard. It's very difficult to be a Delta shooter, but a shooter is a shooter is a shooter. Our guys have to think in 4 dimensions. They have responsibility for everyone's life on the battlefield. Everyone, the good guys and the bad guys. So, life goes on. I get out the military. I actually go back to the Army because, again, I'm that stupid. And I find my way back into the Air Force, remarkably. And now I'm a squadron commander, and I go command a couple squadrons, and I retire. And I'm writing books. So the answer to your question, Griff, is so I'm now writing novels. I live in Alta, Utah. I ski about 140 days a year just to make everybody jealous. And I'm writing novels, and I'm hanging out with my wife. That's what I want to do. Hang out with Julie, write novels, ski, and speed fly. Well, a friend of mine talks to me about John Chapman's sister, which is Lori Longfritz, and she became my co-author. She'd been trying to write her brother's story. She really wanted to write her story and had been trying for a decade and didn't know, wasn't a writer, didn't know how to get a book deal. And would I talk to her? And I said, hey, I'll talk to her. I don't want to write this book. I'm a Buddhist, man. I'm done with conflict. I'm proud and happy to have done what I've done, but now this is what I do. And my life's about philosophy and spending time in a peaceful environment. So we get on the phone. I realize she's going to need a lot of help. It's, what's this going to be? And I say, here's how you can get a book deal. give her some advice, wish her luck, and I get off the phone because I do not want to write this book. I knew John. I'd seen the video footage, which was still classified at that time. I knew all the guys involved. I knew the SEALs. I knew the Delta Force operators. I knew the combat controllers. I knew everybody. I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. I just kept thinking about this. And I realized, I talked to my wife, and she's like, I think you have to write this book. So I called Lori up, and I'm like, hey, this is what needs to happen. I'm going to write this book. We can do it together if you want. But it's not about John. It's about John and combat control. And by the way, your brother wouldn't want a book about himself. I'm telling you, that's not what he would want. So Lori came on as my co-author. I spent 3 years writing that book. Had to conduct my own investigation, reach my own conclusions. I started from scratch, and I wanted to write the essence of combat control. Because, Griff, to your point, nobody knows about combat control. Nobody. Still. And the intent of the book, was to honor these guys. I'm not in the book anywhere, but people have asked me, how come you were on this mission or you were doing this thing? Why didn't you put yourself in your own book? I'm like, because my book is not about me. If I put myself in it, I can't objectively defend it if it comes under attack or promote it to other people. At least for me, I didn't feel like I could do that. So it's about these guys that no one's ever heard of, and we should talk about them some more. But the purpose of that book is different than the intent. I wanted to honor these guys that I knew who had always had to stand behind Delta Force when they're the ones that killed Uday and Kisei Hussein. It wasn't Delta Force that killed him. It's a combat controller named Mike. But Delta Force gets all the credit.
I know that.
Man, Mike deserves to get recognized. So I did that for those guys, but the purpose of the book was to change the public's view of the Air Force. For me, the book isn't about John and combat control. It's about the Air Force. It's about Americans knowing the most badass individuals to walk a battlefield. The most deadliest guy to walk a battlefield in the history of human warfare is in the U.S. Air Force. He's not a SEAL. Here's an example to punctuate that, and I apologize for rambling on about this, but Calvin Markham, Chief Master Sergeant retired. At the time, I think he's a tech sergeant. 9/11 kicks off. He went with ODA 595 Special Forces team, called the first airstrikes in America's response to 9/11. And in his first 26 days of combat, he killed more people than any SEAL in their entire career ever. And you know what? It was his first 26 days of combat. And he had 11 deployments.
Wow.
His power over the battlefield by wielding the U.S. Air Force's precision strike, combined with he's the only guy on the ground who can control all these aircraft, and destroyed 3,500 guys in like 36 hours or something of nonstop airstrikes. That's modern battlefield power. And you know what? Those guys need to be recognized. So that's a long way to say how I came to write that book. And I spent 3 years writing that book 7 days a week, man. It was miserable. And I had some really hard days with that because it brought up a lot of bad things for me too. I can tell you the week I wrote, I spent a week writing John's final moments. I spent a lot of time on what John had to go through when his life ended. And I would just go out and rage against the mountain behind my house. I literally had to leave the house and go out and just like unleash all this pent up stuff. That's a terrible word for a writer to use, but it was just stuff. And you know what? I realized I was still packing a lot of baggage.
I could totally understand. And speaking of those final moments of John Chapman, there's a piece in there that was written, and I think it's a well-known fact. When he was making his radio calls, he had like 15 something out calls, trying to request air support, and he didn't receive anything back. And I don't know if it's been proven if it was a equipment malfunction or it was him himself and his state of just trying to fight to live and survive and press on. But it kind of struck a chord within me and with the resilience piece. And I think it kind of relates to a lot of people, like a lot of people when they're in that the time of need for help, like they'll send out calls for help. and call for that airstrike per se. And do we receive it? Is it us? How do we do a personal equipment check to make sure when we're calling for help, um, that we're gonna receive it the right way?
Man, Griff, that's such a great observation. And I think it's, I can talk about common control and John all day, but I'm really interested in this because I think what you're talking about is one of the problems for all of us who, when we're in trouble and from when we're in a position or we recognize somebody needs help and we want to help them. When you most people are afraid to hit the transmit button to
Right.
let anyone know. That's the biggest fear, is to press the button. It's not to say I need help, it's pressing the button and which is the action to take the decision or make the decision to reach out. And it's the future is always full of possibility. There's always a way forward. I believe this. There's always a way forward. And if you can just take the courage, don't even think about what comes next, hit the button. And the button is, I'm going to call someone I think I can tell this to. Doesn't matter who it is. Could be professional services, mental health, and the Air Force. And those people are dedicated to making us more resilient and happy. They're not the enemy, man. They are there to help you. It's their sole purpose in their professional life. Whether it's them, or if you're religious, if you're Muslim or Jewish or Christian, man, reach out to a priest or a rabbi, or imam, whatever it is that allows you to find someone, or that person that you really love. And it doesn't have to be family. Some of the people I love most of my life are guys I went to war with. Man, I can call those guys and they're going to understand me. Find somebody, anybody, and then hit the button. And if you can just start the dialogue, you'll find that the people are there for you because it's human nature. We want to help each other.
That's huge. And I was actually talking with my spouse yesterday, my wife, in regards to kind of our disposition being in the military, and it kind of relates with what you just said. We're kind of disconnected geographically from our families a lot of times, and
Yeah.
so like our coworkers and our battle buddies, they fill that role. And I think that's one of the big focuses. I think that I want to enact in my work center is that love and care, and just kind of portray that I'm there for my guys. Um, and I think that's huge for them because a lot of them are away from their families.
So you just hit on the greatest word ever invented in human language. Love is the greatest word ever shared and created. What it represents was already there. I mean, it's Darwinian. It goes back millions of years, when you love something. And love is a word that we don't talk about. I get flown around the country to talk about resilience by a number of different groups these days. And what surprises them most, I get from feedback, is everyone sees me as an action guy. And I'm like, hey, I did the things I did, and world records with base jumps and this kind of stuff that I do. But they get stunned because I like talking about love. And they're like, man, I can't believe this guy is talking about that. It's the best word in the world as well. You love your kids more than anything else, most people, if you have them, especially the maternal instinct. It's the strongest bond there is. I think that's second by people who have supported themselves in a trying, traumatic experience, whether that's somebody who survived a rape or other sexual assault, or combat, or a car crash, even. I'm not saying one of those is worse or better than the others. I'm saying that when you go through those experiences, it is love of other people. Like this is what allows you to get through those things. At the core of mental health and resilience and fortifying the force, man, it's love. And I, I believe for me that love saved my life, and I've seen it save so many others. And I've lost arguably my best friend ever who killed himself. Of all the combat controllers I know who've killed themselves, and it's quite a number, my best friend, Pat Rogers, killed himself in November of 2001. And I love that guy so much. And I failed him, and I should have known. And so I should have hit the send button by reaching out to him. That's the inverse. If I'm afraid to make the call for myself, that's one thing. But if you know somebody you suspect they're in trouble, what happens if they kill themselves and you didn't hit the send button? Man, I didn't save Pat, and he was one of the greatest operators I ever knew, and he was my best friend. And I'm 21 years later, I still miss him.
What when you say you should have known, Dan, what markers were there? Obviously, hindsight is 2020, but
That's the problem. You're right, Cody. The hindsight's always 2020, but I should have known because it was cumulative. You know, I knew Pat had trauma and demons because we've been in Somalia together. Went to the first Gulf War together. He was in the Panama Invasion with the SEALs who got shot up. You know, he'd been in combat, but that wasn't where the problems resided. He had personal demons. And you know what? It doesn't have to come from combat. I don't think his demons came from combat. In his case, I think the demons were, I'm not in the fight right now. Everybody else is. I'm worthless. And my personal relationships aren't working out. Most people are going to kill themselves over some sort of family or emotional human drama. And he had just gotten divorced. I knew that. He was in Florida. I'm in Utah. I'm not even, I was not in the Air Force anymore. So it's hard. I don't think you can beat yourself up if you didn't quite connect the dots. But I knew Pat better than I knew almost anybody else. And I just hadn't seen him much. And I didn't reach out enough. Here's a better answer, Cody. If you got a friend that you think struggles sometimes and you haven't talked to him in a while, you should reach out. You people listening or watching, you got somebody like that, you should reach out and check on them. You know why? It's one of the greatest things you can do. And you'll never know if you saved their life because you can't prove a negative either mathematically or philosophically.
Copy that, sir. Have you had people reach out to you key times?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not particularly proud of this, but I've learned to embrace it, and I share it with people when I talk about resilience, because if you want to affect someone emotionally or profoundly, you have to do it through stories. You have to share stories, and the most powerful stories are personal stories. I've learned this as a storyteller now. It's how I make my living. I write books. I never talked about that. I almost killed myself probably a half dozen times, and so I'm not proud of that in a lot of ways. I was always afraid to mention it, but I've really recognized two things. One, when I share that, people think I'm resilient because I'm a really happy, positive energy guy. And they're like, I can't believe you thought about killing yourself. That one, it empowers other people, and the other thing it does, it takes power away from the demons that haunt you. I talk about it a lot. I don't talk about it a lot, but if I open it up, it removes some of the stigma and the power it has over you. And I've got some really good friends who still struggle with suicide. Like a very dear friend of mine was never even in the military. And I love this guy so much. And he does so many great things for people. And man, he has struggled with it, and he will struggle with it for the rest of his life. That's a tough position to be in. I'm fortunate that I'm not in that position anymore.
Right. And I think in such a severe situation or extreme situation, or the end situation, like suicide, I don't think reactive maintenance is the solution. So preventative maintenance is key on this in the whole resiliency piece. And what are some things that you've used throughout your stressful situations that have kept you on track, or allowed you to guide yourself through these situations to keep your head on tight?
Well, so I'm thinking about that. It goes back to the great secret of heroism that I shared with you earlier. If you focus on what you know you need to do, that gets you through the difficulty of the time when you're at risk of death or, mission failure, those sorts of things, or helping somebody through their crisis or helping yourself through your crisis. And if you get through that crisis, that's still only temporary, because I really think where the danger comes is when that reemerges and these things start to build up, or my insecurities or my assessment of myself as a failure perhaps reasserts itself. It creeps back in there. And that's when someone makes that decision to take a permanent action over this temporary or cyclic thing. Because you go through cycles. Hey, I'm up. The Wheel of Fortune, if you do tarot cards, and I'm not a tarot card person, but like there's a lot of history behind that going back to the Roman times. The Wheel of Fortune card is about how once I'm on top, the wheel moves around, I'm at the bottom, it rolls reverse. Somebody else is on top, now they're at the bottom, and how life goes through ups and downs and good times and bad times. So it's when you get through that, I think on the other side, you're not safe. Not immediately. It's then it goes back to preventative or preemptive, maybe is a better term, to how do I help fortify myself against when that's going to come back for me? Because you know what? The sun's going to set. It's going to be a dark night. I'm going to feel alone in the dark. Happens every 24 hours. Man, when I have to face that dark night again, that's when it's going to be hard, especially if I'm by myself and I'm away from home on a deployment. I don't like my boss. I don't think we should be deployed to this country. I don't believe in what I do anymore. These are all real doubts that people can have. And it's okay to have hard and dark thoughts. They creep into your life. It's part of the human psyche. So, that's why if you think you see someone, you're like, man, they're a lot more quiet than they've been for the last month. You can save a life just by giving them a call. Take them to lunch. Don't buy them a beer. Alcohol does not help with these situations. So, sushi is a better response, maybe. I don't know.
We definitely have all of our vices too with dealing with that. And I think one of the common ones is alcohol. But I mean, speaking as a maintainer, we're all caffeine and nicotine junkies as well, too.
Alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine.
For sure.
Yeah. Those things are so bad for us. But humans have been brewing beer for thousands of years, man. And, nicotine is, tobacco, but caffeine's the most addictive of the three. People don't realize caffeine is more addictive. And the devil's bargain with caffeine is caffeine only works if you don't drink it all the time. If you drink coffee every day, you're screwed. Because if you don't have caffeine, then you can't function. Caffeine works if you don't use it, except rarely. It's like, I got to be up for 24 hours or I got to sharpen my focus. I've been working for 24 hours already. Some caffeine will sharpen you, but it only works if you don't drink it all the time. Sorry, maintainers, you're screwed. What can you do?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think in our Western culture, we tend to glorify prioritizing work over everything else.
Americans, it's our culture.
Right.
It's why we're great, but it's also why we're vulnerable.
Correct. And I know, I think in Japan, they struggle with that as well. I can't remember what the term is. I'm not even going to try to say the term because I'm probably going to mess it up, but it's really fascinating. And you have people that are 30 years old dropping dead of heart attacks or strokes and things like that. You look at a man who's come out on the other side of a 20-year career in maintenance. Most of them don't look that good. You got they're kind of bent over, stooped over. They might do some weird things with their eyes and stuff like that.
That's interesting, actually.
If you meet any retired maintainer, they're all pretty messed up. But it's just, I don't know if it's the shift work or what. Shift work is probably a combination of factors: long hours, high ops tempo, shift work, mid shift work. So what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on night shift, Dan?
I think night shift is wholly unnatural for humans. We're not nocturnal or diurnal. We like to operate and function during the day. It's our natural way of existence, and it's reinforced through millions of years of evolution. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's the way it is. So if you're working shift work or you're having to go to war and you have to work nights and all the stuff that go along with that, you're going to be less resilient. You're going to be off mark. You're going to be struggling. It's just the way that it is. I got to tell you, I think it's so cool that your podcast is Two Maintainers and a Cop. Those two disciplines are the backbone of a force like the Air Force, of how it goes to war and does things. Because so much of what has to happen are these things behind the scenes. They're thankless jobs. No one appreciates you or glorifies you, either of those disciplines. And maintenance, I know, covers a broad spectrum of stuff, but cops are in the same boat. Or you could be a cook in the Air Force. You could be, anything else that doesn't get the glory. Fighter pilots and pilots, now special ops because of the war. And you guys, man, it's so interesting. I'm just thinking about what you're talking about there, how hard it is to be a maintainer and how that affects you at the end of your career. Here's what I would add to that I think may have value to your listeners is this. If that's what you've done and you're 10 years in and your back is starting to get stooped, or you're 20 years in and you're going to retire and you feel beat up because you are, and you legitimately have sacrificed a lot of your body and your personal life for the Air Force. What's most important, and this you can take this to the bank, is when you go out that door, either at the end of the day to try and think about who you are, or at the end of your career, you have to understand it's not who you are. It's just your job. Hard as that may be, being a county controller was just a job. It was my identity in some ways, but that's a false identity. Now, how you can overcome that and be more resilient, be the best you can be for your husband or wife and kids and your teammates, and for yourself to go forward in life, is to understand and spend time on, that's what I did. But when you don't do that anymore, who are you? If it's your identity, you're screwed. This is why people kill themselves when they retire. I lost my identity. I'm telling you, believe me, this is absolutely true. It's not who you are. It's what you do. So what I think you have at that time is an opportunity, Cody, is I can now say, who am I? Become something else. I don't recommend writing books. It's a miserable way to make a living, but that's what I did to redefine myself. And it's hard. I'm really intimidated by writing books. I'm really insecure about my writing. Still, I got a writer friend who's got, I think he's got like 18 New York Times bestsellers. And I'm like, man, when I become a writer, he's like, you've published 3 books. You're a New York Times bestseller. Like, you're a writer. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. But what it does is it forces me to become something else and find things you enjoy. Go, whether it's volunteering. I do a lot of volunteer ski instruction for people with disabilities. That's very good for me. I get more out of it, I think, than the people that I help ski. Find those things that allow you to realize that your whole life is it's full of possibility. You can do so many things, even if it's golfing. I don't know why anybody would golf, but I know a lot of people do. So what you want to do, man. Pick up a guitar, write a song.
I think you hit on a good piece there too. Surrounding yourself with positive people that will prepare you or propel you through like a positive progression too, whatever it is. And I think that in turn is how you kind of develop that new identity. You got to surround
and
yourself
shedding people who are not good.
Right.
In my own life, I have separated myself completely from people I'm related to. That's hard to do.
Right.
And for some people it's harder. I drop names, but I know someone who could not have a relationship with their mom. Man, that's a hard thing for a person to do. But this individual decided I had to do this to take care of myself. So people that are negative in your life, people that are always down, if you are working through your own things, which we all are, cutting out those people is more important first step than surrounding yourself with only positive people. I do not do anything with people that I don't respect or that I don't want to work with anymore.
Is there a contrast? No, I don't know. Probably not a contrast, but a cost benefit analysis that somebody has to go through. Let's say they're in a toxic relationship with their parent or their spouse, and they just know it's going to hurt so bad if they separate at the time because they know what's in for them. It's the mind control. It's the,
Manipulation.
the manipulation. Oh, your life is over. I knew it. I knew it. You'll never be a good father. And and they can just count on their kid being taught that doctrine until their child is an adult. Is there a way to overcome that? Is there a way to look at the light at the end of the tunnel and carry yourself forward?
It goes back to the things we've been talking about. You have to rely on the people who can help you get there. If it's so hard for you to do, there's a running joke where when I was a squadron commander at one of the places I worked, there was a running joke because the running joke was how many times had Colonel Schilling been married? And that number varied from 2 to 7 because nobody really knew. And I will tell you proudly now that the number was in the middle of those two, between 2 and 7. And so it was a big mystery to everybody. But I make a joke of it now. But I will tell you, one of the scariest things I did in my life, this is not action guy stuff at all, was to come home and tell, all right, I'll come clean, the third person I had been married to at that point, hey man, we can't be married. And this isn't working for either one of us. I was terrified to do that. I had to rely on my sister to give me the courage. Mr. Special Ops guy, Black Hawk Down, base jumping dude, I had to call his sister to go, man, how do I do this? There was no other people involved. No one was cheating anyone, but I was miserably unhappy. It was really hard. But the key was I found somebody who could help me get through it. Now I will tell you, I'm incandescently happily married. I've been married for 12 years. My wife, Julie, and I. Julie helped save my life. And Julie and a book saved my life. That's not hyperbole. So, you have to find these sources that give you what you need, that are positive for you. And that's what you do, because it's hard, man. That was, in a lot of ways, pulling the trigger of a gun. That's muscle. I know I got to shoot this guy. I'm just going to do it. I've been practicing it. No one practices getting divorced. No one practices coming home to tell somebody, I can't live with you. You're not a good person, or you're not a good person for me.
Right.
Don't put it on them. I got to make a break for me. And you know something, if you're unhappily married, I'm not a psychologist, but I will tell you, don't stay married. Find your peace, or go work it out together. If it's something part of your marriage and it's not working, don't just let it limp along. Go address it with your partner. Get marriage counseling. Anyway.
What was the name of the book?
That book is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Okay, copy that.
That book saved that's one of those books that exists in the world. Where is it? It's right there. My dog-eared copy. That you can flip it open to a page and you'll find something relevant to your life that moment. It is one of those books. And that book saved my life. I learned that in that book, that what I had done, the bad things I had done, either in my personal lives or the things that I had to do to kill other people, that's already over. It's in the past. And what I hope to do in the future is fine, but all I have is now. And am I happy? And I realized I was not happy. And I was a commander of a squadron at that time. Man, I was dedicated to my people. I think I was a good commander. I don't really know. You have to ask the people who worked for me, because I felt I worked for them. My job as commander is to get them what they need and help them be successful, because they're the mission. I'm just the guy that sits at the top. If you're that man or woman, like, you are not, I don't think, the leader. You're responsible for everybody. You have the authority, but you work for them. But so at the time, I'm a squadron commander, man. That book pulled me out of a black hole. And then my wife, I've got that person who I can talk to about anything. And you know what? It's not even about me either. She can talk to me about anything. If you don't have that in your relationship, try and find it, But if you know you're not happy, you're not doing any favors for your kids to stay together. You're teaching them that a shitty relationship is the way life should be because they don't know any different. I'm speaking way out of my depth here, but it's just based on my experience in the world. The reviews of Dan Schilling do not reflect official Air Force policy or whatever that disclaimer is.
Kind of funny.
Yeah, that's definitely huge. I don't know if you wanted to share that your one little factoid about happiness that you're going to talk about. Over here, we made a note of it.
Oh, well, yeah, you just kind of, I mean, in our initial talk, Dan, you just kind of offhandedly dropped an absolute wisdom bomb on us that I've been thinking about pretty much every day since we spoke. But the only U.S. document that contains the word happiness.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I'm currently, the book I'm writing now is on resilience and finding purpose and finding equilibrium. I happen to feel that resilience, as treated by social scientists and clinical experts like LCSWs or psychologists, is half the word. Because to them, there's this sort of time, there's this balance point. And when I'm down, something bad has happened to me. To get back to a state of equilibrium or performance or happiness, resilience is how you recover from something bad that's happened. And that's true. I agree with that, but that's the definition. It's a hardiness, or it's the ability to come back and be resilient in the aftermath of something, always something bad. To me, that same principle is how I get from bad over here back to this place of balance. Is the same way I can move forward in life. So for me, that clinical definition of resilience is only half the work. The rest of it is how you pursue happiness. And this brings us back to what you mentioned for me. In my study, and I read a lot about this and I think about it a lot, how you recover from bad things. I'm going to write about that in my book, but how it provides for our balance and equilibrium every day, to balance work and life, the demands of your husband or wife and kids with the work and what I do as an individual, that's equilibrium. But how I go forward in the world and be happy, man, that's the full, complete power of resilience. And what I realized in the course of this, as I was studying Aristotle, I don't study Plato too much because he's so depressing, but you get into John Locke and some of these other philosophers who are quite interesting, is that happiness is central to the value of being a human. And what's amazing is, the Declaration of Independence has this phrase, the pursuit of happiness. This is in this document that we were using to not only declare ourselves separate from England, which was, hey, our declaration is we're not going to pay taxes anymore. It's that we're going to form our own country. So it's this foundational document. And in there is included this phrase. And it goes back to Aristotle and John Locke, and it came from Jefferson. Jefferson's got warts. You can talk about the problems of who these people were who drafted this document, because it was all males and they were all white. But the fact is, what they were trying to do to form this country that is still a work in progress was it should be founded on the pursuing happiness. It's the only document in the world that founds a nation or a group of people. And they say they're founding it so that they can pursue happiness. God, that is so amazing. It's part of what makes America exceptional. And to me, it's the essence of why we live. Love is followed closely in my mind by the word happiness. I'm a happy person now. I was not always a happy person. I'm not always happy now. I've had some really frustrating experiences recently, and writing books is misery. But the fact is, it's like, that's what my life is about. And if you're listening to this podcast, I think it's what your life's about too. Commit yourself to your maintenance team and your cop squad or your combat control team or your fighter jet, whatever you do. That's great. You should do that. It's what we're paying you to do. It's your responsibility to the rest of America to do this really well. but you should be pursuing happiness and love as well, because you know what? That's why you're alive.
Yeah, well, I guess I kind of relegated it to U.S. documents, but if we're talking world documents, that's that increases the scope for sure. Yeah, I've been dwelling on that ever since you mentioned it to me, and I've probably been annoying Griff with it because we work in the same office, and that's just something I keep returning to, and it's something that's so simple on its face. It should be so simple on its face, but we tend to get wrapped around the axle. So many different things in life, societal expectations, the expectations of people that we care about.
Those are real.
Quite often. Yeah.
People get married a lot of times because they're told, they're expected to. You get into your 20s, what do? Yeah, you're supposed to get married and start having kids. Do that if you want. Do not allow society to tell you how you should be happy if you don't want to do it. And it's a hard thing to do. But I'll tell you, I learned that from a book. And now I've read a lot of other books, Krishnamurti and some of these other philosophers that are more contemporary than going back to Socrates or Aristotle. You can learn from those people. My most recent book, The Power of Awareness, I titled it partially as an homage to Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. It's the right title for my book. It matches. But don't make any mistake. I titled it that because, and that book's about how not to be a victim. Don't get robbed, raped, or murdered. I want to help people be safe. That's part of my purpose in life. It's how I find happiness and value that I feel like I've been contributing. But man, it goes back to that book. And that book is all about being happy. And, it's interesting.
Being happy and being aware. And the things like rob, rape, murder, those are all physical actions. But so often we tend to neglect the psychological impact of being a victim or falling or victimhood, the psychology involved with victimhood. So
there's a lot of great books out there. And you know what you have to do if you're struggling with this? You have to find the book or that individual or that philosophy. And I would argue you find it best through that book, through books for yourself that you need. Brene Brown, she's a brilliant researcher and author. And she really, I think, had her biggest impact when she started talking about shaming. And I think for most of her work, a lot of this is about girls and women and, how you can grow up in this social expectation and the different world that men and women live in. Men live in a different world than women. And if you've got a different orientation, even, or other aspects of who you feel your identity is, it gets even more complex than that. Like, that if you're struggling with any of those, you find someone like Brene Brown. I highly recommend her. I read Margaret Atwood. She's the most brilliant writer of contemporary times, and she's this amazingly insightful person. And if you want to understand how humans are going to be in the future, man, read her books. It's terrifying sometimes to let out the secret, like humans do not do a lot of good things sometimes. But find what works for you, and you have to spend time doing that. And you're not going to find it in television or in movies. You have to read something or listen to podcasts that are powerful, that speak to you, or audible books. And the best thing, I believe this so much, you guys, and if anybody's listening, spend time thinking about it. Turn off the TV, don't read a book, go for a walk. So many things will come to you when you're just out going for a walk. And don't get too caught up in your thoughts, because then you're not looking around you. Just look around. Right. And if you just take in the world around you, walk somewhere you want to walk. Don't go anywhere unsafe. Read my last book. But go out for a stroll, man. Go for a long hike. Get the energy out. That's what I do. In order for me to think, I meditate, but I don't meditate in a lotus position. One, I'm a middle-aged dude. My knees don't do that anymore. But the second thing is I'm so hyperactive, I have to be in motion. So I go out and ski from 8,000 feet to 11,000 feet on my skis. I ski uphill. And while I'm in motion, my mind calms down. I can just think, and I process things that bother me. And I think about things that I want to think about, and then things that are important, and how I can be a better person. If you spend time thinking about how to be a better person and how to be happy, you know what? You will be. But if you just go home and watch TV and drink a beer, you won't be.
You're escaping.
You're not doing anything.
Right. Copy that.
That's huge.
Not doing anything.
Well, I know you talked earlier, Dan, about hitting the slopes today for sure. And I don't want to keep you from that. But before we let you go, I was just curious to see if you had anything that you want to plug, any projects that you're working on currently.
Oh, I mean, you know, I really believe in having a purpose in life. You don't have to cure cancer. You know, or solve world peace or get a Nobel Prize or a Pulitzer, whatever. You know what you have to do? For, I guess, in summary, if you impact somebody else's life positively, you can pick a person that you think deserves to be happy or that you just like a lot or love. If you can contribute to their life, those are the most satisfying things I've ever done in my life, is to have done something for somebody else. Man, if it's somebody else on your team, you're not going to find many people in the outside world, outside of the U.S. Air Force, that understand and appreciate the team and the selflessness at which you operate every day. You know, I think what you guys are doing is amazing. I appreciate you giving me a platform to have a voice. I hope it had some value, but I think what you guys are doing, two maintainers and a cop with no experience are starting a podcast to fortify the force. That's good.
It's a great learning experience for sure. We're definitely enjoying it.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I bet it's miserable sometimes.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you helping us out, sir. I mean, obviously we kind of, I wouldn't say stumbled upon you, because I've known about you since 2001 when I was 15 and I first read Black Hawk Down, and I thought, like, damn, this dude is a badass. And then of course, throughout my time, of course, I enlisted later in 2008, and going through SEER school, being there at INDOC on Medina Annex and combat controllers. Dan Schilling was always kind of there in the periphery. And then when we started this up, you were the first name that came to my mind. And so it kind of freaked me out when you responded to my Instagram message. I just, like, it's incredible. I was more nervous about this talk than I was interviewing our two chiefs that we did preceding us. So it's just an honor to have you here, sir, and it's an honor to speak with you. And just so much wisdom that you're able to impart. I think we're probably going to have him back for a second session. If you'd be willing to join us, we could probably talk about it. But yeah, if
it has helped, man, I'm happy to do it. And for everybody listening, man, and I'm speaking on behalf of everyone who ever served in the Air Force. What we see you people doing from the wings now, like, I really stand in awe of the continued selflessness with which you serve the greatest country in the world, and you don't really get the thanks from the public. It tends to be platitudes. It's Memorial Day, it's Armed Forces Day, it's Veterans Day, and everyone's burning burgers and drinking beer. But I got to tell you, from my perspective, I'm honored to have been associated with all of you people just by sharing the same service. And I hope everybody's happy, and I hope you find love in your life. And I wish you the best as you continue to do the hard work you have to do. And so, guys, thanks for having me on. But there's 7 inches of powder outside that window. I can see it. And if I don't go skiing, there's going to be bloody murders.
Yeah, you got to get after it. Go enjoy some for us, because it's just sunny out here in California. So go enjoy that snow for us, sir. We appreciate it.
No worries, guys. Thanks, Cody, Griff. Thanks for having me on, man. Best of luck, you guys. And if I can ever help the Air Force in any way, I'm all about it.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir.